With the ceasefire being announced, what really is the roadmap ahead? Joining us at the moment is a former US Ambassador to NATO under President Barack Obama and a former president of the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. With us is Ambassador Ivo Daalder. Thank you so much, sir, for speaking to us. And let me begin by asking you what your assessment is regarding the extension of President Trump's deadline. Has the US lost more than the war of narratives?
Well, it wasn't important that he extended this deadline because the threat of destroying civilization was one that was completely and totally unnecessary and, of course, morally and legally unacceptable. So we're much better off having a ceasefire. The question now is, can we turn that ceasefire into an lasting agreement? And the difficulty here is for the United States that despite 6 weeks of extraordinary bombing and extraordinary destruction of the military capacity that Iran has a stranglehold over the Strait of Hormuz and is likely to continue to hold that stranglehold. So we will see what these negotiations will end up with. But right now, Iran seems to have more cards than the United States when it comes to ending this war in a way that will benefit all.
And that appears to be quite evident in the recent social media posts. And this is what Donald Trump has just said. He says the U.S. will work closely with Iran, which has been determined, which we have determined has gone through what we call a productive regime change. There will be no enrichment of uranium, and United States will, working with Iran, dig up and remove all the deeply buried B-2 bombers' nuclear dust. It's now been very exacting. Satellite surveillance, nothing has been touched from the date of the attack. They're also talking about tariff and sanctions relief with Iran, and many of the 15 points have already been agreed to. The question is, we thought there were 10 points. Now Donald Trump is referring to 15.
Well, you know, the U.S. had a 15-point plan. The Iranians have a 10-point plan, and it seems like we're moving towards accepting the Iranian 10-point plan and calling that the Trump 15-point plan. But we're all getting very confused in this. I mean, the reality is, if the United States says that because the nuclear materials are buried deeply because of the B-2 bombing, referring to the June 2025 strikes, then why did we go to war in the first place? Because, in fact, they have been deeply buried since that time. If we are accepting some form of Iranian control over the Strait of Hormuz, of course, that did not exist prior to the bombing campaign in February. If we are talking about no enrichment, what does that really mean? Is Iran actually going to give up the right that it believes it has to enrich uranium, as something it has been doing for the past 25 years? So many questions, but little doubt that Donald Trump will declare victory, no matter what the outcome, no matter what the nature of the deal, no matter what the circumstances. The more likely thing, however, is that while Iran's missile inventory has been significantly reduced, it will retain possession of the nuclear materials that have been inside Iran since the enrichment process started in early in 2021. That it will maintain control in some form over the Strait of Hormuz, and that the regime that is now in power will be, through sanction relief, become more and more able to stay in power. That is not why this war was started, and therefore you can't in any way conclude that this was a war that Donald Trump should have started, let alone won.
Absolutely. And, you know, as you mentioned, there'll be some amount of face saver. And this latest post, in fact, I read out one post. There's another one that just come up. It says that a country supplying military weapons to Iran will be immediately tariffed on any and all goods sold to United States of America, 50% effective immediately. There will be no exclusions or exemptions. So is this going to be what he's going to take to the American people? Because clearly there is domestic pressure that's also bearing on Trump, many believe.
Yeah, I mean, clearly he was looking for a way out of this war, and the rhetoric, the rhetorical rhetoric over the weekend was designed to find a way out of this war. He was stuck. This was a war that he started in the firm belief, based in part on Israeli views, but also on what he says was his instinct and his gut, that a few days of bombing would lead to a fundamental change of the regime, a rising up of the Iranian people, and an agreement that would remove all nuclear materials from Iran. We're not seeing that. He's now back to the threats of tariffs. Remember that the countries that are providing Iran with military support are Russia, which has not had any tariffs on it, so it'll be interesting to see whether that will happen, and China, which, of course, the President of the United States is committed to visiting in May in order to get a big deal on the trade front. So he's threatening to put tariffs on two countries he's trying to get other deals with. Somehow, as usual, it doesn't all add up.
Right. Now, the very fact that, the reopening of Strait of Hormuz would involve a cost of $2 million per ship, which Iran is imposing, do you somewhere see this as a strategic defeat for the United States, at least in terms of perception?
Well, I think it's a strategic defeat in the United States in many ways. The Strait of Hormuz was completely open. It is now controlled and become a financial source of revenue for Iran. The United States has expended extraordinary amounts of military capabilities and equipment that is no longer available to deal with the far larger and more important threat of China in the Indo-Pacific. Indeed, the United States has moved significant military capability from the Indo-Pacific to the Gulf and is likely to have to keep it there in order to deal with Iran and the potential threat it poses to the Gulf states. It has lifted sanctions on Russia, enabling Russia to sell more oil, including to India, at a good price for Russia, increasing the revenue to Russia at a time that Russia is in a war of aggression against Ukraine. I mean, the clear winners out of this war are China and Russia. The clear loser out of this war are the people of Iran, which is one of the reasons we apparently wanted to go to war, but they are now living under a much worse and much harsher regime and a devastating economy in a devastating country. And the other clear loser, I'm afraid to say, is the country that decided to go to war, which is the United States.
That's a very important question, because we've seen reports of how approval ratings have been slipping for President Trump. How unhappy are Americans with what has gone down in Iran is a big question, because we're also seeing demands asking for the 25th Amendment to be invoked against the president. How seriously do you take these demands?
I mean, I take the demand seriously. I don't believe it will will happen. It requires cooperation of the cabinet, and the cabinet is one thing, loyal to President Trump. So I don't see the 25th Amendment happening. If there's going to be change in American politics, it happens in the way it should happen, which is at the ballot box. And here, clearly, there are signals that the American public writ large and increasingly parts of Donald Trump's base is unhappy with the president for good reason. The president ran on two things. He was going to get rid of inflation, and he was not going to get involved in foreign wars. And he has now increased inflation, and he is very much involved in foreign wars. In fact, he's involved in a war that was unnecessary and is deeply, deeply costly to the United States in economic and geopolitical terms. And so his approval ratings among Democrats have always been low. Among independents are now deeply underwater. 60 to 70+ % of independents no longer support disapprove of the president. And even among his own party, you now have deep divisions between those who had bought into his idea of no more forever wars and those more traditional Republican hawks who believe that they need to continue to fight this war. So he's not out of the water just because there is a ceasefire for 2 weeks. He's still in trouble politically at home and from a strategic perspective abroad.
Now, one aspect, of course, is that United States conducting this war campaign itself has come under question now. But many believe that United States, really underestimated Iran's own defense or retaliation capabilities in the wake of this offensive. How do you think such a big miscalculation happened in the first place?
Well, I'm not sure we actually, the U.S. underestimated the capabilities of the Iranians. The intelligence community was very clear that there likely would not be any regime change, even if you were able to take out the supreme leader and other leaders. The intelligence and military community was very clear that if you had a major strike like this, they would retaliate against Gulf states, and they would try to close the Strait of Hormuz. I mean, in that sense, the U.S. Official community, intelligence, military community, the foreign policy elite had looked at this war for a very long time and concluded it just wasn't worth it. What turned out to be wrong was Donald Trump's gut, his instinct. He likes to go with his gut. He thinks his gut is better than those of others. And his instinct was that this war was going to happen very, very quickly, that there would be a regime change, that Iran would not retaliate other than in a token form against the Gulf states, and that if the Strait of Hormuz would be closed, he told General Kane, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs Staff, you, the military, are so good, you'll figure out a way to open it. And so I think what we're dealing with is a traditional problem that some American presidents have, particularly those who have used force and found it was successful. They underestimate their enemy and overestimate their own capabilities. Right. That is how the U.S. has gotten stuck in so many wars and in so many places for so many years.
In this particular case, along with the gut, there's also one other aspect that many perceive as being responsible for this, and that is President Trump entrusting his inner circle with the diplomatic agenda rather than working with the officialdom, as you rightly mentioned, and taking their advice more seriously. Do you think that has been a key mistake here as well?
Yeah, I think it was a key mistake that led to the war. Clearly, the negotiations that were ongoing between Iran and the United States, particularly Steve Witkoff, his friend and golfing buddy, and Jared Kushner, his son-in-law, were making progress. People who actually knew something about the subject, including by all accounts, the national security advisor of UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer, Jonathan Powell, who was in Geneva for these negotiations, thought that the Iranians were actually putting on the table some pretty important concessions that could lead to a deal. It's also clear that Steve Witkoff in particular just didn't understand the details of the nuclear negotiations and mistakenly believed that the Iranians were dragging it along when in fact they were offering something real. So I still believe that this war was unnecessary because some kind of deal, perhaps even a better deal than Barack Obama was able to conclude back in 2015, was possible. I'm deeply worried that we now have same people, including J.D. Vance, who nice man, but has no experience in diplomacy or indeed in much else. He's a young man with very little diplomatic experience, that they are now going to lead the negotiations with the most experienced Iranian team you possibly have. And my fear is that we will be maybe taken in by negotiators who are much wilier and more seasoned in diplomacy than the U.S. team that will be there. And that includes, by the way, the Pakistani mediators who've put themselves into a pretty remarkable position of becoming mediators between the United States and Iran. Who would have ever thought that?
Absolutely. And, you know, as you mentioned Pakistan, I want you to come in on this, because how much of truth do you feel there is about Pakistan's role as far as the mediation is concerned? Has a non-NATO member then become, responsible for facilitating these talks? And what does this indicate about NATO's relevance now? There's also the larger question about, the kind of social media posts that were put out by the Pakistan Prime Minister, which indicated, and many view that as some kind of dictation that has come to him from the United States rather than, something that they've put out on their own. How are you looking at all of this?
Yeah, I don't see the Pakistanis as being an independent mediator that is trying to find a way to bridge between two sides. I think the Pakistani role is to send messages back and forth, and sometimes sending messages that don't quite add up. So, for example, the Pakistanis wanted, the Iranians wanted, an end to the war against Lebanon by Israel, and Israel's making very clear that that's not happening. So where the communication breaks down, we don't know. As to to NATO, and the NATO Secretary General is meeting today with President Trump in Washington. The relationship is in the worst state it has been in the 77 years of NATO history. The last 3 months, first Greenland and now Iran, have been extraordinarily damaging to the alliance. Let's see what those conversations are going to be like. I do think there is a role, not for NATO, but for the European militaries in maintaining security, and if the Gulf is opened, to help keep it open, including clearing of mines, which are all around the Strait of Hormuz, which the U.S. military, frankly, is unable to do. The European militaries have the minesweepers necessary for this. The U.S. no longer has those. So I think that there is a role there. I don't see a role in mediation because I think there isn't. It's very hard to mediate with, on the one hand, a group of people who don't have the experience, and on the other hand, the most wily negotiators in the case of Iran.
Right. You know, as a diplomat, did the rhetoric in this particular war episode really surprise you? Because, you know, while it's true that during a period of war, people and, you know, opposing camps, enemy sides will take extremist sort of positions, absolute sort of positions. But in this case, the kind of rhetoric, whether it's being used against Saudi Arabia, whether it's the kind of rhetoric that we saw on Easter Sunday being used against Iran, you know, there's a lot of concern that's been expressed about the kind of profanity that has been used. Does that surprise you as a diplomat, as somebody who's been watching American politics very closely?
Well, nothing with Donald Trump surprises me these days. So in that sense, no. On the other hand, it's quite extraordinary for the President of the United States to use this kind of rhetoric, talk about the end of civilization, to do and to compare the rescue of a pilot with what happened to Jesus Christ on Easter and Good Friday and Easter. It is all just going too far, and it demonstrates a lack of seriousness. In some ways, both on what it is that we're engaged in, war being about the use of destructive means to achieve political ends. We've seemed to have forgotten about the political ends and are glorifying the destruction element, talking about taking a country back to the Stone Age, and you name it. We all know, we've all heard it. It is so far removed from what needs to happen at this time, which is a focused effort to see how our political goals can be achieved. Unfortunately, our military efforts seem to have overcome any thought of politics. And now that politics is back in the ceasefire, the guys who know how to deal it better are, I'm afraid, going to get the better out of Donald Trump and the crew that he has assembled.
Right. Now, the reason I asked you this is also the kind of diplomatic impact it's had, whether we're talking about allies in the Gulf of the United States or we're talking about relations with other members of NATO. It appears that their relations have also been really tested and up to a crisis point during this entire episode. How do you view these relations, you know, going forward with the kind of positions that have been taken over the last 5 weeks?
I think it's going to be very difficult. I think every country is going to sit down and say, how much can we rely on the United States? And the answer is going to be less than before. I think this, by the way, is a conclusion that the Indian government and the Indian people in the past 16, 17 months have also come to. The United States under Donald Trump is not a reliable interlocutor on trade, on military and on diplomatic issues, and even as an alliance member, it can no longer be relied upon. So I think what you will see is more and more countries trying to reduce their dependence on the United States to find other ways in which to achieve their interests without having to rely on the United States. For the Gulf states, I think that means more cooperation on the economic front in order to reduce the strategic importance of the Strait of Hormuz, more pipelines, more ways of getting to other places to get oil out of and gas and other exports that do without having to rely on the Gulf itself. But it also I think it's going to lead to a closer attempt to reassert some kind of diplomatic engagement with Iran. I mean, the reason that the Saudis in the first place reached out to Iran, in fact signed a normalization agreement, is because after the 2019 attack of the Houthis and the Iranians against their refinery systems, the United States did nothing, and so they were looking for alternatives. I don't think this strengthens the relationship of these countries, of the Gulf countries, of the Asian allies, and indeed even of countries who were looking for a closer relationship with the United States. I don't think they're going to be looking to that. They're going to look for more independence. To use the term of art, they're going to de-risk from the United States.
Ambassador Daalder, thank you so much for speaking to us here at Times Now.